Chatbots get a negative rep, but it's because it's so new. People need to be a little bit more patient and give it some more time to fully develop.
When you look at what it's doing and what it can do, it's making people's lives far easier.
I actually helped stand up Prudential Financial's first ever customer facing chatbot back in 2022. What's the purpose of trying to give our customers the best service if we're using outdated tools?
Generative AI has made accessing this technology super easy. Everything's just at the end of an API. It's predominantly technical people that are the foundations of this community because they're the ones who can access the APIs and build stuff with it.
If we could have one button that did everything for you, and we have an user interview where they say, hey, that'd be ideal, I will design a button that does that. All it takes is one bad interaction to really sway you one way or the other. At the end of the day, the technology is cool, but is it getting the job done?
This episode of VUX World is brought to you by NLX. NLX is the enterprise conversational AI platform that enables some of the world's most admired brands to build and manage chat, voice, and multimodal applications at scale. So if you are looking for a platform to power all of your conversational automation initiatives, you're looking for something that's enterprise grade, something that gives you the flexibility and control to create the kind of experiences that you know your customers need, then check out NLX. You can find out more at nlx.ai. That's nlx.ai. Thank you, NLX, for sponsoring VUX World. The following is a conversation with Alex Shin. Alex is the conversational AI design lead at Prudential, and this conversation is an interesting conversation for all of those designers out there, all those conversation designers who are now working with generative AI technologies. This conversation is all about how the role of user experience design, one, has changed since the world of NLU, natural language understanding based chatbots, and what the kind of role looks like today when you're using generative AI technologies, moving from specific kind of like diligent wordsmiths that pen every single word and every single piece of grammar to more like custodians of the experience that focus on more high level outcomes, like is the goal being completed and is the experience as smooth as it can be? Can we optimize the delivery of the responses in a more user-centric way? And so it's a very interesting conversation that charts essentially what's changed in the area of design and also the importance of design in generative AI-based projects, which is something that is quite often overlooked. You are going to enjoy this conversation very much with Alex Shin from Prudential. All right, Alex, we are rolling again. We got disrupted slightly there. We were just talking about the EU Chatbot Summit and how good it was to get back connected with everybody in the community and all that lot.
Yeah, definitely. It was very energizing to be surrounded by people who are so passionate about conversational AI. And yeah, I'm really glad I went. And Scotland and was just an amazing country. And I'm just really grateful to have had that opportunity for sure.
Did you sample any haggis while you were there?
Yes, I did. The deep fried and battered haggis. So it was kind of like smothered in like other flavors. So I didn't like quite, taste the intestines, but it was delicious.
I didn't quite taste the intestines. That's good.
Yeah, the sheep stomach,
Yeah. I do love a bit of haggis though. I always have a bit of haggis when I'm in Scotland. I have Scottish family, and New Year's Eve was always just like big bowls of haggis everywhere and all that lot. So it's very near and dear to my heart. But anyway, thank you for joining us, Alex. Appreciate that. It was really great to meet you. So tell us about yourself then, Alex. Tell us about your role, conversational AI design lead at Prudential. What's kind of involved in that? What's the scope of your role, and how are you getting on over there?
Yeah, of course. So just like starting from the top, I'm Alex Shin. I'm the senior UX designer at Prudential Financial, and I function as the conversational AI design lead. And I focus mostly on chatbots and live chat platforms. And I actually helped stand up Prudential Financial's first ever customer-facing chatbot back in 2022. And, that's where we started.
Nice. 2022. So that was right at the kind of like, what is it? I don't want to say ground zero. That sounds a bit horrific, but it was right at the sort of like, ChatGPT was put out there and the world changed and all that kind of stuff. Like, so I suppose it was probably a good time to be launching something in 2022 because you probably got a lot of excitement from the powers that be at Prudential, given that you were launching something that is akin to this new superstar application that's just kind of come to market.
Yeah, exactly. But I would definitely say when we launched in early 2022, it was before I'd say, the societal generative AI boom, where everyone was just tuned into like what ChatGPT was about and what all these generative AI solutions were offering. It was just when it was starting out. So, we kind of like caught the wave before everyone started talking about like, hey, what's a hallucination? Or hey, how do I like stop it from streaming so much?
Yeah, how do I stop it from selling a competitor's product? Nice. So, how did you get into it then? What's your sort of journey into conversational AI? Everyone seems to have some sort of like crazy,
Yeah,
background and experience that finally arrived at this point. So, yeah, what's your story?
yeah, for sure. Like I definitely had a career pivot of sorts too. I started out, studying social policy or political science, pretty much, at
As you do,
university. Yeah,
as
yeah,
you do.
exactly, right. The name of the game was like law school at one point, and then I,
Right.
interned at a few law firms. I even interned at like a public defense firm, and it just wasn't my cup of tea, to be honest with you. I just didn't see myself really diving in and just like really soaking in the career. So I, bounced around a little bit, and then I ended up taking a boot camp. Got a full scholarship at a boot camp to study UX design. Started out as a generalist, and then just started out in startups that focused on AI. And from there, went on to Prudential, and the rest is a story in the making, I guess.
Nice. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting that because when we first started getting involved in this kind of stuff, it was like, the rise of like Alexa and Google Assistant and stuff like that. And it was always very apparent in those days. I say those days, harking back to the good old days of 2017. But it was always really apparent in them times that you have to have some really solid design discipline when it comes to creating these experiences. Because with Alexa, what was perhaps unique is that it was an audio consumption platform, and therefore it was very well understood that the only instrument you've got to play with is the sound that comes out of the speaker. And so the concept of design was quite a strong one because it was like, well, it's got to sound really good. It's got to
Yeah,
kind of like be something that not only is it needing to do the job that the user needs it to do, but also it's an audio interface, and therefore there has to be a design element to it because it needs to sound good. And so I think I feel as though those who were involved in designing conversational interfaces at that point kind of took with them, and it's an ethos that VUX holds very, very sort of like near and dear to our heart, is the ethos of these conversational experiences have to be designed and diligently designed. And
yeah,
I don't know if you concur with this, but I feel a little bit, and this is part of my talk at the Edinburgh Summit, was that generative AI has made accessing this technology super easy. Everything's just at the end of an API, and therefore it's predominantly technical people that are, the foundations of this community because they're the ones who can access the APIs and build stuff with it. And so it seems as though, to me, there is a very much a technical lens being placed on all of this. And I've mentioned this countless times in the past where, like, there was a kind of like a post online that did particularly well, which was AI or AI agents are 5% AI and 95% engineering. And it's kind of like, okay, so absolutely zero design then, And so it's kind of like, it feels to me at least as though UX design, experience design has always had to fight for its seat at the table. In the days of the web, in days of mobile, it's always been something that has been tremendously important for those organizations that get it. But for those organizations that don't get it, it's always been a fight to put design in its rightful place, which is at the seat, giving it a good seat at the table. And I kind of feel as though there's many organizations organizations making that same mistake in the generative AI era, which is that it's viewed predominantly as a technical problem and there isn't any design consideration whatsoever. Would you concur with that, or do you have a different perspective on that?
I'm a little biased, of course. I'm working at Prudential Financial, and like we're trying really hard, and we are succeeding at being at the forefront of technology because, like, what's the purpose of trying to give our customers the best service if we're using outdated tools? So going back to the bias, we place a heavy emphasis on the user experience and human-centered design at Prudential. So I can only speak to that to Prudential, of course, because that's where I'm currently at. But we really make it a point to make sure that like the end user is getting what they need. And it's not just like, hey, was the latency good? Or like, was it like quick? It's like, did the answer do its job at the end of the day? It's not about just the confidence score of like, hey, the LLM recognized that the question was, XYZ, and the LLM got it 95% correct in regard to confidence score. But it could be confident in something that's a little off base. So, like, in that regard, I feel like we really place the emphasis on the user and just like how they're experiencing this generative AI. So, I mean, I definitely can see other places that don't place as such a strong emphasis on the user experience, but at Prudential Financial, we totally do.
Mm. Good. That's refreshing. It's actually a bit of a trend, I suppose, in the financial sector that there does seem to be more of a focus on experience design. A lot of the banks in the UK have got a very strong competency in the design kind of side of things. And I think in the NLU world, that is required because you have to diligently design absolutely everything. Whereas in the generative kind of world, it's more like the
Right.
temptation is, well, the models will deal with that,
Yeah, they'll just like, click a button, it'll just like parse everything out and just like stream everything out for you and stuff like that, right?
Yeah, yeah. Oh,
Yeah, yeah.
brilliant experience. Yeah, that's kind of like Taras in our team always says that he's got this magic marketing button, and you just press the magic marketing button, and all of a sudden you've got
Yeah.
viral posts going everywhere. And it's a bit like that with generative AI. You just press the AI button, and it'll take care of it all.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, like it's pretty cool because now that I work with generative AI solutions, I get to see kind of the before and after and the evolution of like what AI has become. Of course, like the NLU model where everything was pre-scripted and everything had to be programmed and mapped out properly, and like, or else it would just kind of like give a, wrong intent or something like that. To now seeing like where things are kind of like more automated. um I don't know, it's just like something I take a step back and I'm just like, wow, things really changed in a matter of like a few years.
Mm. And I think there was a bit of like, the NLU kind of world and the designers kind of coming up in the NLU sort of world. I think there was a period where it was a bit like almost a bit of sort of like disillusionment in terms of, is this thing taking my job? There's all this kind of like talk about AI displacing jobs and replacing jobs and all this
Yeah.
kind of thing. And I think that the very same thing was kind of happening in the conversation design sort of space, whether people acknowledged it or not. It was like, is this thing going to take my job? But then when you actually look at what it's doing and what it can do, it's making people's lives far easier. It's
Yeah.
like, all of that kind of like some of the impossible challenges that were faced in the NLU world is like mapping out every possible available potential turn in a conversation. And it's like, it's almost infinite in terms of where these things can go based on what's said. And it's kind of like, a very challenging thing to properly, diligently design. Whereas generative AI gives you all of this kind of potential. So it's almost like a bit of a lifesaver for those that kind of grasp hold of it. So I wonder what your kind of perspectives are on, working with generative AI technologies now as a designer. How has it changed in comparison to what it was in the NLU world?
Right. So now that I work with more generative AI solutions, I'd say that I'm dipping back into my more generalist skill sets of like, how should the platform as a whole function? How should the experience be? Back when I was focusing strictly on conversation design and like scripting content, It was more like, yes, of course, I designed the UI and like how the chatbot should look, but it was more, I felt like words were my medium. Like every time we tried to do a self-service use case, yeah, we'd have buttons that like take you to the next step, but the words were the most important part. Now that there are generative AI solutions, and depending on like how it's integrated, whether it's like a companion or some sort of co-pilot solution, I feel like it's the whole platform, the whole website that can be like maximized, as opposed to before when it was just a chatbot and like you were kind of like beholden to that, rectangle. If it's generative AI and the website can talk to the chat, Gen AI chat, then how awesome is that?
Mm, yeah, definitely. Um, and yeah, it's interesting that how you're saying you're kind of relying more on your sort of generalist skills, if you like, and it's kind of like, yeah, I suppose there is there any kind of like specific kind of like requirements that are like different now, so to speak? So it's fair enough to say that we want to consider the holistic experience, which I think is definitely the case. um I have this kind of like concept of the designers in the generative AI world are like the custodians of the experience, which is, you're not crafting every single word, but you are there to ensure that the thing does its job properly, it does it
Yeah,
successfully, and it's easy to use, it's effortless to use. And then you can apply the same, if you want to call them conversation design principles, you can do, but they're more conversation analysis principles, I would say, from the
yeah,
sociology side of conversation analysis.
yeah,
Um, and I think you can apply those same concepts because it is a conversation after all. And some
yeah,
conversation design kind of elements still remain true. Um, so yeah, for me, it's more about you're the custodian of the experience rather than the sort of like the wordsmith type of
yeah,
thing. It's more
exactly.
you're
Yeah.
the publisher, so to speak.
Yeah, I'd say before I was crafting every detail in some sense. Like I had a say in like, man, that punctuation mark not appropriate there. Now with generative AI streaming and like responses and things of that nature, there's some things that I just can't touch, like sometimes the LLM will be just giving us a response I that we can't program in another way, so to speak. So for that matter, I do feel like we are, because general Gen AI designers are more custodians because you're taking a look at like what else can we impact in regard to the experience, and certain things like legibility, or like how is the response broken up? Should it be broken up into subtopics and subheadings, things of that nature, just to make the response more uh, resonate with you more? It just, I completely agree. Like, I do think that we are more custodians now.
Mm. And what do you think that the impact of that is then? Because in the world where it was very much like not all of it, but a good part of it was dialogue writing, you know, planning and mapping out conversational pathways and stuff like that, and planning for what's going to go wrong and all that lot. And then the NLU design and management side of things as well were supposed the three sort of like component parts of the NLU based conversation designer. But the crafting of the words bit, kind of like the interface is pretty much not necessarily exclusively, but a good portion of the interface is words. And so, from the customer or the user's perspective, it's the words that are the interface. It's the only real thing that they've got tangibly to interact with, aside from rich
Right.
media and stuff like that. So, what's the impact of that on the experience? Are we learning that actually the intricacies of the words themselves don't particularly matter as much, as in this, if I would have wrote this sentence, I would have probably done it in 10 words rather than 16, and I would have had a slightly different sort of tone and stuff like that. However, the response from the LLM does its job. does it? Are we devaluing the written word, or are we learning that actually the intricacies of it might not matter as much as we perhaps thought?
No, I actually think um in the kind of, if you just follow me here, like in some way, the intricacies of the words are even more amplified and more magnified and more, important, because if something does come up with like the inappropriate tone or some sort of like inappropriate or not appropriate punctuation mark, or just comes up with an error of some sort, you're more attuned to it, right? You recognize it more. So I feel like the onus is more on, of course, the tech team or like whatever, whoever else, to make sure that they correct it. So I feel like the emphasis on the intricacies of the language are just as strong, if not a little bit stronger, in my opinion.
Interesting. You mentioned that the tech team would fix it. So, what's the relationship between design and technology in your experience? We
Right.
mentioned at the beginning that these solutions tend to have more of a technical focus and attract a lot of technical talent. Yet, the custodian of the experience is the one with the customer centric mindset and the design lens on it all. So, like, what's
Yeah.
generally the relationship between design and technology?
I definitely feel like design gets kind of like the credit sometimes. We're the ones that show you, hey, these pretty words and these pretty pictures, and like we get the credit for like, hey, I wanted it to look like that. And they're like, oh yeah, this looks great. But the tech team is the one working in the back end to make sure that either they're, crafting the UI from a development standpoint, or working on the LLMs and trying to like fine tune the prompts and things of that nature. So uh, at the end of the day, we're a very collaborative team. We make sure that each person wears their own hat, but they have a huge say in like other things. Like, obviously, I'm not an MLE by any stretch of the imagination. So my skill sets are limited in that regard, but I definitely welcome any sort of opinions or thoughts and input from our MLEs or data scientists or UI developers on like, hey, Alex, what if we could change this, or what if the tables were kind of like shrunk a little bit so that there more data could be fit into it, and that way, you know, uh, the end user gets as much information as efficiently as possible. So at the end of the day, we're a collaborative team, and we make sure that everyone does their part, but we all have like a good say in the matter.
Hmm. And that's, I suppose, again, one of the important roles of a designer, because I think the designers often in these situations kind of become facilitators in some way. It's kind of like, yeah, you're facilitating on behalf of the end user. Ideally,
Mhm.
you're researching and understanding those end users and representing that back to the team in an effort to persuade, if you like, if you want to use that word, or encourage or develop empathy within that team so that they do the right thing on behalf of the user. And that involves, you know, compromise is the wrong word, but it involves soliciting opinions and
Yeah.
then understanding which opinions add weight towards contributing to the end goal of the user. So I often think that, whether it's purposefully, I've never actually officially being taught design, although I've had a lot of experience in it. But it's always ended up in sort of the roles I've had is being that the designer for some reason becomes facilitator. Is that kind of the case at Prudential where you are?
I'd say we are definitely the champions of the user for sure, in that regard. And we always do like exercises where like we call it like blue sky thinking, or the art of the possible, just to see like on the screen, hey, what could be possible if anything was on the table, in regard to like, hey, if we could have one button that did everything for you, and we have an user interview where they say, hey, that'd be ideal. I will design a button that does that. And then the next following screens will show you all the results that populate from that one button click. And obviously that, drives my developers and all the MLEs and data scientists like very angry and stuff like that, or more just like frustrated, I should say. But we do that type of stuff, and we make sure that At the end of the day, though, the solution is the best it can be. And in order to do that, we do need to take into account the technical feasibility of things, whether it's just in regard to like technical feasibility as a whole, or if it's just the technical feasibility within a given sprint, or like a 2 week period, or like a month long period, or a few months long period. But yeah, I mean, yeah, I don't want to use the word compromise either, but we definitely have to take into account the full picture of like what's possible in order to make sure that our users are getting the best thing at the end of the day.
Agreed. Um, so I know he's kind of like probably skipped ahead there and jumped straight into, which I think is a very interesting and important topic, which is the role of design in generative experiences. Can you share a little bit about some of those experiences that are being deployed at Prudential? Is that secret sauce, or are you able to share some use cases or something like that?
No, yeah, I can share some for sure. Because as mentioned before, I did help stand up the first ever customer facing chatbot called Rockwell. That's like Prudential's chatbot for our customers, and also some of our advisors as well. And that's like currently a conversational AI NLU type model that we employ. But we're definitely in the works of trying to, modernize it and things of that nature. So, that's in the works as well. Within those Rockwell chatbots, we also have like self-service use cases where, advisors can look up, or like, hey, what was the most recent withdrawal or something along those lines? Like look up transaction history, client specific information, things of that nature. And then we also have more generative solutions where, of course, what we've been talking about, where responses get streamed and then responses get, have confidence scores and things of that nature that just kind of like let you know uh, at the end of the day if the model is getting the job done, and like just making sure that the end user is just, getting the response that they need to answer the question. And in addition to that, we also have live chat options. And I feel like we really like dove right into like, hey, generative AI, but like I feel like at the end of the day, live chat is just as important, because you can never dictate what someone wants to do, their preferred method of like contacting or like reaching out to a company, especially a company of like Prudential size, where you never know. Like some people might be of a demographic where they prefer typing and they just prefer talking to a chatbot. Other people are more like, hey, I want to talk to a live person. Even if it is typing, I want to know that I'm talking to a real life person at the end of the day on the other side of things. At the end of the day, Prudential definitely tries to offer that kind of like bespoke solution offering, in that if you want a human, there's a human. If you want a chatbot, there's a chatbot. If you want more generative, there's a generative solution too. And we're just making sure that we're all encompassing. And of course, there's IVR and things of that nature too. But as mentioned, I focus on chat, so that's more like my purview and more. But yeah, like those are just some of the experiences we offer, and I'm really excited. And as mentioned again, really grateful to be a part of a company like Prudential, where we really are trying to be tech forward. And as someone who works in tech, that's all I can ask for.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. Um, Interesting. So the strategy over there then is essentially kind of like, we will not refuse to serve somebody on their channel of choice. Is that fair to say? It's make all channels available. Ideally, serve all use cases as best as you can, if it's feasible, and see where the demand naturally spreads to. Is that correct?
Yeah, I definitely think so. Like we offer different options to make sure that the customer's needs are being met. And I told this to some of my team members. Like, why should we have our customers and our users or advisors, whether they're, uh, whatever product they're working on, or if they're our own employees, or, you know, etc. Why should we have them play by our rules? We are, I personally am a user champion, so I should be trying to make sure that the user's needs and their preferences are the ones that are being met, as opposed to the other way around where they have to meet our needs. So I just feel like that mindset is something I wholly fall behind, like in regard to just being like, hey, if they want to talk to a live person, have them call in, and that's great. If they want to chat to a live person, have them live chat. So yeah, I completely think you're on the right track with that one.
Mm. Do you think that the reasons for those types of preferences are that customers simply prefer to call and talk to somebody, or simply prefer to have a live chat? Or do you think that it's a symptom of, them believing that it's the most beneficial way in some regard without trying other options? Is it because other options to do the same thing, maybe they have tried it and have struggled with it or something like that? Do you think that is it purely based on preference and I would rather do that, or do you think that there's kind of more to it?
No, yeah, I definitely feel like going back to like more academic terms and like sociology. I know that was mentioned before. This might be even psychology, but I think it's like a combination of nature and nurture, meaning not exactly nature and nurture, but like what do you bring to the table up to that point, like your experiences up until that moment, which I liken to nature, meaning like what you bring to the table, and then nurture being like the environment and the experiences afterward. Um, so exactly what you're saying. My answer would be it's a combination of both, meaning if your experiences up until, this date showed that, you know, calling in was at one point the only possible option you had and something you've grown accustomed to, then let's totally recognize that and have that as an option. But if they realize like, hey, something else is more convenient or else is more efficient, I definitely feel like that weighs in too and can kind of like, change the complexion of the person's preferences. So I do think it's a combination of both. Like, I think it's not to sound cheesy, but I think it's the whole user experience as a whole that leads to what the person wants to choose. Like
Mm.
if, and I was mentioned this in my speech at the University of Edinburgh for the European Chatbot Summit, but like all it takes is one bad interaction to really sway you one way or the other. So if you have a really bad phone call, or if you have a really bad live chat or really bad chat experience, that might sway you to explore other options. Then vice versa too. Like if you have an amazing live chat interaction, that might be like, all right, live chat's the way to go from here on in.
Yeah, I think the challenge there is just the kind of like difference in experiences from different companies. Like Prudential might have a brilliant live chat service, but Virgin Media might be completely terrible. And so if I've used Virgin Media and I've had the worst experience ever, it's Jacob's law of internet user experience, isn't it? Your perceptions and experiences are shaped by the things that you typically do most often, and those things are put onto the whatever it is that you choose to do next. So if my perception of live chat based on experiencing it with other companies is terrible, and I turn to Prudential, but your experience is really, really great, my expectations are going to be that it's rubbish and I'm not going to bother. I'm going to do something else. So I suppose
Exactly.
there's a bit of that going on, which is perhaps that chatbots, maybe this is a generalization because, again, some companies have done it really well, uh, but some people generally, like the Joe Public of the world, don't particularly like chatbots because they're a little bit of a new school, press one for this, press
Exactly.
two for that.
Yeah.
So I suppose it can be quite challenging to get people to give it a go when their perceptions have been shaped from poor experiences elsewhere.
Yeah. And not only that, I feel like just the newness of the technology came with like challenges too, like technical design, whatever challenges they were. Like there was a growing period in order for the technology and like chatbots, for this example, to kind of like find its rhythm and just be like, oh, like this is how they work and this is how it should service the customer. So I feel like just like this is an aside, but I feel like chatbots kind of get like a negative rep, but it's because like it's so new and like people need to be a little bit more patient with it and just give it some more time to fully develop. And I feel like we're at that cusp and like we're seeing it develop right before our eyes with generative AI and things of that nature. So yeah, I mean, another aside, I do think chat will be much more widely used. Like once, especially if it develops and becomes like kind of like an all-encompassing or more comprehensive solution.
Yeah, I think if you look at stuff like, what you can do with RCS messaging and what you can do with like WebRTC and stuff like that, it's like there, and then obviously you've got the typical channels like voice and chat, SMS, social. It's like all of these, every single channel has the potential to be conversational if it's not already natively conversational, like many of them are.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
yeah,
Yeah.
the more the technology gets more kind of like competent at holding conversations, which is understanding what's going on, and being able to deliver against them, which is a combination of search essentially and fulfillment, then I completely agree. Especially if you look at the younger generation, if you want to say. I think I'm old enough now to be able to understand that there's a generation beneath me. Maybe there's a few. Those people do not even want to phone, don't even want to talk to a real person, don't even want to even entertain that kind of option. It's just messaging first. So I think that even if it's not something that happens in the next 5 years, the general trend generationally is that companies are going to have more of these automated messaging services available, because as their customer base ages and the younger kind of crew become more mature, it's going to become most of your customer base at some point.
Yeah, for sure. I definitely feel like it uh likens back to that nature nurture, not the most appropriate, metaphor, but in the sense of like, hey, what you're accustomed to or like what you're surrounded by immediately is something that you get used to. And like and then, more experiences can change that. But yeah, I feel like if some generations where they were just used to a certain technology as the only option, asking them to change, and change is never always a fun thing. So asking them to change can like come with its own territory of like challenges and things of that nature.
Yeah. So you referred earlier on to some of the solutions there. You've got chatbot, NLU-based chatbot, live chat, IVR. You mentioned some generative solutions. Are these generative AI solutions part of the chatbot? Are they different, like web search type of solutions? Like, can you tell us more about what it is?
It's actually focused on like a different audience and things of that nature. It's more like internal facing,
Okay,
these generative AI solutions. So yeah,
right.
but like we are working to meet our customers where they want to be met and modernize our customer facing solutions too, of course.
Yeah, yeah. There's is that kind of an ongoing thing? Is that more of a research kind of phase? Because there's a lot of banks and stuff like that, and financial institutions in the UK that have been doing quite a lot of work in this area. Is that something that is in stream, kind of like being thought about? Like, what stage are you at with that kind of stuff?
Yeah, it's been ongoing. We've been talking about it for some time. I, as like the UX designer, was just like, hey, when can this get generative? And this was like possibly like a month into the conversational NLU model being launched and stuff like that. So like it's always been on our minds and we're always trying to modernize and be tech forward. So yeah, it's like an ongoing process for sure.
Mm. And then on the NLU side, that launched in 2022.
Yeah.
What's been the kind of like evolution of that over that time period? Have things changed since then? Is it improved? Like, what's the general sort of journey that's been on?
Yeah. So our customer service, excuse me, CSAT score, customer satisfaction score is like exceeding like industry standards. Like we out of a five, we average around a four,
Hmm.
and we just make sure that at the end of the day, the customer's questions are being answered appropriately. So we have a huge team, not a huge team, but we have a team that does like massive work, I should say, to make sure that the intents are being properly mapped to the utterances and things of that nature. So in addition to that, we're also working on self-service use cases, of course, and then eventually we look to modernize more with generative AI and things of that nature.
Yeah, and
Exploration, things of that nature.
yeah, definitely. There's been some really great example use cases of that, and we had Mark Worden from NatWest on the podcast recently, and he was sharing some of the use cases that NatWest have been exploring, and one of which is in their NLU chatbot when the model doesn't sufficiently understand something to a certain degree of confidence. What it will do is it will fall back to what they call a low confidence menu, which is essentially a disambiguation menu, which is we think it's one of these three things. Can you tell us which one it is? And instead, what they did is they replaced that, or at least gave the user the option to replace that with a generative search. So
Right.
if they got to a point where they thought, it could be one of three things, instead of saying, we think it's one of these three things, what do you think it is? They then implemented the option to say, we think we can answer this, but we're going to use generative AI. Do you want to give it a go? And if the customer opts in, it will then run a retrieval augmented generation process, try and answer the query. And they've had some pretty good, compelling results with that, which is very interesting. And so, yeah, they've had some great success with that. Some other banks have been trialing to instead of the disambiguation menu or the kind of low confidence NLU intent triggering retrieval augmented generation, instead throwing that to a LLM classifier and providing it with various context around what's in your model and also the customer utterance and context and stuff like that, and then having it attempt to predict what intent that should belong to, which is proving quite good at things that an NLU would never kind of pick up on, which is stuff like, if you were to say something like, Alan Nicol from Raza always uses this example, which is great, which is if you ask if it's an airline and you want to upgrade your seat and they ask you if you're sitting in economy and you say, unfortunately, then that's never going to trigger your confirmation intent. It might not even trigger a kind of decline intent because you might not have that training data there. But if it doesn't, and you can throw that to an LLM and give it the context of the conversation and say, what does this mean? It's more likely to come back with that's a confirmation rather than anything else. So there's quite a few, quite a few interesting use cases popping up of how to actually get more mileage out of the NLU rather than ripping it up and throwing it away. It's actually like you can probably make a big improvement by leveraging this kind of stuff in what you've already got there,
Yeah, like our NLU models also employ data science models too, kind of like in tandem, similar to what you were mentioning, I believe. But yeah, like our options we're exploring all our options and just making sure that, I know I sound like a broken record, but that at the end of the day, our customers' needs are, being met, and that, at the end of the day, the technology is cool, but is it getting the job done? And whatever solution that may be, we want to make sure that solution gets realized.
Yeah, definitely. And then what sort of over the years that you've been doing this, the last kind of 3 years or so for Prudential, what are some of the lessons that you've learned over the course of that time, or even maybe since working with generative AI? What are some of the lessons that you can share with either other designers who are either in a similar situation or hoping to get into a similar situation, or other organizations exploring generative solutions?
Right. So the biggest thing I took away in my 3.5 to 4-ish years, while working up to the launch of in 2022, is that UX design really is so leverageable in every aspect of work and personal life. Like when you're putting the human or the user at the center, that translates to so many different options and so many different avenues of whether it's crafting an email or just talking with your friends. And if you whittle it down more to conversation design and how you start out with pre-scripted scripts, so to speak, you start to realize you become more self-aware of how you're communicating. And I feel like that is an important skill to have in any regard. But like when you move it into the generative AI world, that makes you hyper focused on, in a good way, right? More focused on how is this information being conveyed to the user. And my takeaway would be just to use every experience as like a learning experience in some regard. And I don't mean like, hey, oh, that was a bad thing that happened, so it's a learning experience. I mean, like, take time to reflect and just be like, how can this be used for outside of just this one scope of creating a self-service use case about transactions? How can this be used in the future? So I feel like that's a really good takeaway that I want to impart on others, and whenever I have the chance.
Nice, nice, wicked. Well, Alex, thank you so much for joining me. It's been an absolute pleasure, my friend. Hopefully,
Yeah, of course.
I will see you again in
Yeah,
in Edinburgh for some haggis.
yeah, for sure, for sure. Yeah, definitely.
Nice one, appreciate that, and thank you all for tuning in. I will drop your, if you're happy with that, Alex, your LinkedIn onto the show notes and stuff like that. If people want to reach
Yeah,
out and
sure.
connect with you and
Yeah, that'd be great.
and share the learnings further, yeah,
Yeah,
nice one. Thank you so
yeah.
much, Alex. Appreciate that. Thank you all for tuning in, and we'll see you again on the next one. Thank you so much. Bye now.